This episode contains disturbing behavior involving animals, talk of violence, and references to harm against children. Listener discretion is advised. It's a quiet evening in Sacramento, winter of 1977. Inside your house, the refrigerator hums. The nightly news murmurs from the television. Yellow light from the outdoor lamps filters through the curtains and settles across the carpet. The neighborhood is calm. Nothing about the evening feels out of place. Then you hear it. A small metallic click at the front door. You do not move at first. The sound is too ordinary to register as danger. Maybe someone in the family is coming home. Maybe a neighbor stopped by. Maybe the house is simply making noise. Then the floorboards answer. One step, then another. The footsteps do not belong here. A man has entered the house because the door is unlocked. And in his mind, that unlocked door became permission to proceed. He moves through the hallway with the focus of someone following a rule only he understands. He is thin, pale, and hollowed out by delusions that have been feeding on him for years. His eyes are fixed somewhere beyond the room. His hands carry the residue of private rituals no one in this house could have imagined. 1977 Sacramento feels distant now. Back then, a familiar neighborhood could make an unlocked door feel like nothing to worry about. That comfort became the opening one man needed. He did not have to break through every door. He only had to test the knob. In August 1977, near Pyramid Lake, Nevada, officers found Richard Chase blood smeared and behaving erratically. Blood and animal material were connected to his vehicle. Authorities found weapons, blood-stained clothing, and a container holding raw liver inside the car. The scene raised the possibility of homicide. Testing later determined the blood and liver were not human. Jury: Pyramid Lake showed the gap between criminal evidence and behavioral danger. Once testing showed the blood and liver were not human, the immediate criminal question narrowed. But the risk should have widened. Animal harm is recognized across criminal justice and social service fields as behavior that can appear alongside other forms of violence or escalation. It does not predict every future crime, but it should not be dismissed as isolated weirdness either. Law enforcement could only charge what the evidence supported. That part is clear. Once the incident failed to become a prosecutable homicide, the system had no effective hold on him. The behavior did not need to be chargeable to be dangerous. Richard Chase's problems reached back into childhood and adolescence. Sources describe a home with strict parents, frequent arguments, and physical abuse. By age 10, Chase was reportedly wetting the bed, setting fires, and hurting animals. Later, as a teenager, he became preoccupied with the fact that he could not perform sexually. He reportedly saw a psychiatrist about the impotence, and the psychiatrist connected it to intense anger and emotional disturbance. Jury: Background is not an excuse. It is context. That history does not explain everything he later did, but it shows how long the deterioration had been building. In April 1976, Richard Chase was taken to American River Hospital after injecting rabbit blood into his own veins. His father found him on the floor of his apartment, vomiting, shaking, barely able to move, claiming he had eaten a bad rabbit. At the hospital, Chase first said he had been poisoned by the rabbit. Then he claimed the rabbit had battery acid in its stomach and that the acid was burning through his own stomach. Hospital staff concluded Chase was mentally ill and he was sent to the psychiatric unit. He was diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic and told staff he needed to drink blood because his body was weak and falling apart. Jury, paranoid schizophrenia was the diagnosis used at the time. In plain terms, schizophrenia can affect how a person understands reality. It can involve delusions, which are fixed beliefs that remain even when facts do not support them. Most people with schizophrenia are not violent. Chase's case is extreme because his delusions became specific and behavioral. That is not motive in the ordinary sense. It is not robbery, revenge, jealousy, or anger. It is illness shaping behavior. On May 19, 1976, Chase was involuntarily transferred to Beverly Manor Psychiatric Hospital in Carmichael. During his stay, staff repeatedly found him outside on the grounds with blood around his mouth and the decapitated remains of sparrows or other small birds nearby. On another occasion, 2 birds with broken necks were found outside his window. Chase denied responsibility and claimed the blood around his mouth came from cutting himself while shaving. Staff began referring to him as Dracula because of the blood fixation. Jury, for Chase, blood was tied to survival. Drinking blood and consuming organs became part of how he believed he could keep himself alive. By the summer of 1976, treatment appeared to improve his condition. Staff notes indicated that by mid-September, he had not mutilated birds or asked for blood to drink for some time, and he had been participating in group activities. Doctors believed they could not help him improve further at Beverly Manor. On September 29, 1976, he was released from Beverly Manor. His parents had conservatorship over him, and staff strongly emphasized that Chase continued taking his medication. After his release, Chase moved into an apartment on Watt Avenue. His mother initially made sure he took his medication, but she later believed the drugs only made him easier to handle and that he no longer needed them. According to later accounts, she weaned him off the medication without consulting doctors. By January 1977, Chase was no longer taking prescribed medication. Soon after, his delusions returned. He accused his mother of poisoning him with dish soap and again became convinced that he needed blood to survive. Jury, this is the failure point that keeps repeating in this case. Chase had been hospitalized. His behavior had improved with treatment. Staff emphasized medication. But once he was back outside the hospital, the structure around him weakened. Medication only works when someone continues taking it. Supervision only works when the people responsible understand what they are supervising. Chase was released with instructions, but the danger depended on whether those instructions were actually followed. They were not. On December 29, 1977, Richard Chase's violence reached a quiet residential street. Ambrose Griffin, a 51-year-old husband and father, stood in his driveway, unloading groceries from the back of his car. He was moving through the routine of an evening that should have ended inside with his family. Richard Chase sat nearby with a .22 caliber weapon. A sudden crack cut through the air. One round struck Ambrose Griffin in the chest. His wife initially thought he had suffered a heart attack, but the truth was worse than that. He had been shot outside his own home and later died from the wound. Jury. Ambrose Griffin's murder gave investigators very little to work with at first. There was no known connection between Griffin and Chase. That kind of violence is hard to read because investigators usually look for motive through relationships, money, conflict, opportunity, or revenge. Chase was operating from a different internal logic. January 23, 1978 unfolded with a characteristic stillness on Tioga Way. 22-year-old Teresa Wallen was 3 months pregnant and moving through the routine of a Monday morning while her husband David was at work. Richard Chase approached the home, reached for the doorknob, and found the door unlocked. He entered with his weapon raised. Teresa encountered him inside the house. The confrontation lasted only seconds before Chase opened fire. After the shooting, Chase remained inside the residence and committed acts of mutilation tied to his fixation with blood. Jury. Teresa Wallen's murder marked a clear escalation. I do not know what it feels like to live inside compulsions that strong, but I do know this. Cases like this are why people never fully relax inside their own homes. It is not healthy to live afraid of every sound, every door, or every shadow. Still, when you study a case like Teresa's, it becomes very easy to understand why the lock starts to feel less like hardware and more like survival. 4 days after the violence on Tioga Way, Chase entered the Marywood Drive home of 36-year-old Evelyn Meroth. On the morning of January 27, 1978, 52-year-old Daniel Meredith was also inside the home. The exact sequence is not fully settled because Chase later claimed he had been in a semi-conscious state. Investigators believe he encountered Meredith in the hallway. Meredith was shot twice in the head at close range, including one shot between the eyes. 6-year-old Jason Meroth may have been shot before Meredith. Forensic evidence indicated Meredith had stepped in Jason's blood before he fell. Jason was fully clothed, reportedly dressed for a planned day trip to Sierra Nevada. Evelyn had been shot above her right eye and mutilated with the knives from her own kitchen. A child came to the house looking for Jason and interrupted what was happening inside. Chase later said he was startled and left, taking 22-month-old David Ferreira's body with him and Daniel Meredith's Ford station wagon. Case accounts described a spent .22 caliber casing in the crib area and blood evidence suggesting David had been shot there before his body was removed from the home. Evelyn and Jason were later found in the master bedroom. Jury. This has to be handled carefully because the exact order of the murders is not fully settled. What investigators could reconstruct came from the physical evidence, where the bodies were found, where the blood was located, what Meredith had stepped in, and what was missing from the house. The result is still clear. Chase entered that home, killed the people inside, and left with the child's body. While the Meroth crime scene was processed, a second horror emerged. 22-month-old David Ferreira was missing from the house. For days, David's family and the Sacramento community were left between knowledge and confirmation. Every search area carried the possibility of an answer no one wanted. The search ended on March 24, 1978. Case accounts describe post-mortem mutilation before David's remains were later found concealed in a cardboard box in an alleyway reported near a church and a supermarket roughly 3/4 of a mile from Chase's apartment. Jury, there is a particular cruelty in waiting for confirmation when the evidence has already led your mind toward the answer. For 56 days, David's family lived in that space. The bridge to apartment 212 on Watt Avenue was built through the red Ford station wagon taken from Daniel Meredith. Eyewitness reports, DMV records, and a woman who recognized Chase and said he resembled the composite drawing helped investigators narrow their focus. The station wagon was found near Chase's apartment, less than a block away. By the time detectives arrived on January 28, 1978, the investigation had a name, an address, and a door to knock on. Chase refused to open the door. Detectives used a ruse. They spoke loudly as if they were leaving, then waited outside the apartment. When Chase stepped out, he was carrying a box. After a brief chase and scuffle, officers arrested him and recovered his pistol. The box he carried reportedly contained bloodstained rags, a bloodstained green plastic bucket, a diaper pen, and pieces of a toddler's brain, giving investigators a direct link to David Ferreira. A search of Chase's apartment and vehicle turned suspicion into forensic confirmation. In the trunk of his vehicle, investigators found a 12-inch butcher knife and bloodstained rubber boots. Inside Unit 212, the walls, floors, ceiling, refrigerator, and eating utensils were bloodstained. The kitchen held an electric food blender stained with blood. Dishes in the refrigerator contained human body parts, and a container held human brain tissue. The apartment was part of an ordinary complex. People lived nearby, past his door, and had no idea what was inside. The trial of Richard Trenton Chase began in early 1979 in Palo Alto, where the case had been moved under the weight of public attention. Inside the courtroom, Chase sat at the defense table with a physical presence reduced by illness, confinement, and the deterioration that had followed him into custody. The defense had evidence of severe illness, the diagnosis, the delusions, the hospital history, and the behavior around blood and organs. The prosecution had evidence of decision-making. Chase carried a weapon. He tested doors. He entered when access was easy. He left when interrupted. He took a vehicle. He returned to his apartment. Jury, mental illness and legal insanity are not the same thing. A person can be severely mentally ill and still be found legally responsible. The courtroom was not only asking whether Chase was sick. The question was whether his illness prevented him from understanding what he was doing or understanding that it was wrong. Could Chase be deeply psychotic and still legally responsible for murder? The legal system rejected the insanity defense, determining that Chase could be held responsible for the killings. On May 8, 1979, the jury found Richard Trenton Chase guilty on 6 counts of first-degree murder. On June 8, 1979, he was formally sentenced to death, with execution to be carried out in San Quentin's gas chamber. Chase was moved to death row, where his behavior continued to reflect the same beliefs that had shaped the case from the beginning. The conviction gave Sacramento a legal ending, but it did not answer the larger question of how a man with so many warning signs had remained free long enough to enter those homes. Richard Chase would never face the state's executioner. On December 26, 1980, one day after Christmas, prison guards found him unresponsive on his cot. He had hoarded prescribed medication over time and swallowed enough to end his life before the state could carry out the sentence. The overdose ended the life of the man known as the Vampire of Sacramento at 30 years old. The investigation into Richard Chase became part of a larger conversation in criminal profiling. Robert Ressler and the FBI's Behavioral Science Unit studied cases like Chase's to understand how crime scenes could reflect an offender's behavior, mental state, and level of organization. Chase became associated with the disorganized offender profile because of the chaotic scenes, the lack of concealment, the proximity of the crimes to where he lived, and the evidence left behind. Jury. In profiling, disorganized refers to what the crime scene suggests about the offender's behavior. Investigators look at planning, control, movement, cleanup, concealment, and how much risk the offender appeared willing or able to manage. The profile did not solve the case by itself, but it helped investigators understand they were looking for someone deteriorating in plain sight. Jury. The legal case ended with a conviction. Richard Chase's life ended on death row. But Ambrose Griffin, Teresa Wallen, Daniel Meredith, Evelyn Meroth, Jason Meroth, and David Ferreira were still gone. They were people with homes, routines, families, and futures that should have continued. What was taken was more than the breath in their bodies. There was so much life still ahead of them. They simply deserve better. We honor them, and we hold them in our hearts as we close. Join us next time as we delve into the life of a mother who believed freedom was worth killing for. Slide into the shadows.